It was cold, cold like you can't comprehend. He couldn't feel his fingers or toes. He huddled in the snow, trying to shield himself from the wind scouring the mountain. He was exhausted. Every breath he took hurt. His oxygen tank was empty. Conditions were too poor for a rescue. His radio crackled to life. Base camp had managed to patch him through to his pregnant wife at home in New Zealand to say goodbye. His final words to her were, "Sleep well, my sweetheart. Please don't worry too much." Mount Everest, where you can reach up and touch the heavens. Man has always strived to conquer the mountain, yet often it's Mount Everest that does the conquering. During a 36-hour period from May 10th to 11th, 1996, 8 people perished when they were caught in a blizzard while attempting to descend from the summit of Mount Everest. What went wrong during that fateful disaster? Why is Mount Everest so deadly? Mount Everest straddles the border between Nepal and Tibet. It's the crown jewel of the Himalayas, a 1,500-mile-long mountain system. Contrary to popular belief, Mount Everest is not the world's tallest mountain. With an official measurement of 29,035 feet, the peak of Mount Everest is the world's highest point above sea level. The title of the tallest mountain on Earth belongs to Mauna Kea in Hawaii. Measured from its submarine base in the Hawaiian Trough at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, Mauna Kea is 33,480 feet tall. However, only 13,796 feet of the mountain rises above sea level. Reaching nearly 5.5 miles into the sky, Mount Everest looms large in terms of human inspiration and awe. Since that first historic ascent of New Zealander Sir Edmund Hillary and Nepalese Tenzing Norgay in 1953, more than 5,000 people have successfully climbed Mount Everest. Sadly, more than 300 people have died attempting to climb the mountain. In fact, an estimated 200 dead remain on the mountain. Some bodies remain according to the wishes of the dead. Most remain because of the difficulty and expense to retrieve a corpse. In fact, just below Mount Everest's peak, there's an area known as Rainbow Valley, filled with frozen dead dressed in brightly colored winter gear. Although there are 15 known routes and route variations to the peak, most climbers use the 2 main climbing routes, one of which is a more difficult climb and approaches Mount Everest's summits from Tibet in the north. The other more popular route comes up from the southeast ridge in Nepal. The average cost to climb Mount Everest is around $70,000. The cost includes permits from the government, equipment, provisions, guides, and other essentials. Aside from cash, climbers need plenty of spare time. Climbing Mount Everest takes between 2 to 3 months. The Himalayas climbing season is short, lasting only a few weeks. From late April to late May, the frigid weather conditions typically improve, creating a narrow window of time allowing climbers to ascend. Mount Everest is generally climbed in a series of stages, rather than a single long ascent. Climbers will often spend weeks at base camp, acclimating to the altitude, but also waiting for suitable weather conditions. Spring temperatures on Mount Everest can reach as low as -4 degrees Fahrenheit to -31 degrees Fahrenheit. At the summit, wind speed is often in excess of 100 miles an hour. Assuming good weather, a fit, experienced, acclimated person can climb Mount Everest in about 37 hours via the Nepalese route. That includes 4 6-hour treks from base camp to Camp 1, Camp 1 to Camp 2, Camp 2 to 3, and Camp 3 to 4, with plenty of rest stops in between, and then a final summit ascent of 10 to 12 hours. Climbers die on the mountain in a variety of ways: avalanches, falling rocks, crevasse falls, and from exposure after getting lost in whiteout conditions. Acute exhaustion, dehydration, hypothermia, hypoxia, and severe altitude sickness can also be deadly. At the South Base Camp, which is 17,598 feet high on the Khumbu Glacier, oxygen levels are around 50% of what they are at sea levels. At the peak of Mount Everest, oxygen levels are 1/3 of what they are at sea level. Common symptoms of altitude sickness are headache, nausea, dizziness, impaired or delayed cognitive abilities, and violent chest-racking coughs with frothy pink sputum. 95% of climbers carry supplement oxygen and use it when they reach the death zone or above 26,000 feet. The final 2,780-foot stretch of the climb past Camp 4 is where the majority of deaths occur. In the death zone, air has so little oxygen that even with oxygen tanks, climbers have likened simply breathing as akin to vigorously running on a treadmill while having the flu. Typically, climbers can only spend about 25 minutes atop Everest to allow time to descend to Camp 4 before nightfall to mitigate problems with capricious afternoon weather and to avoid running out of supplemental oxygen. Knowing the consequences can be death, why do people try to climb Mount Everest? Probably for an astonishing sense of achievement, for the amazing euphoria, You are literally on the top of the world, the closest you can be to the stars while still on Earth. Climbers have called the feeling of standing on Mount Everest indescribable. The hopeful 33 climbers who planned to summit on May 10th craved the extraordinary moment when they'd stand on the roof of the world. However, for some of them, the journey brought fear and pain, and for others, death. There were a few different groups on the mountain that day: the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, a national Taiwanese expedition, and 2 private companies catering to Westerners: the Adventure Consultants team led by Rob Hall and the Mountain Madness team led by Scott Fisher. Though they were business rivals, experienced climbers Rob and Scott were both leading teams from Nepal via the Southeast Ridge, so they decided to cooperate. Their 14 climbers and 6 guides would make the journey up the south face of Mount Everest together. The wind had been bad, but slowly calmed throughout the evening of May 9th. At around 10 p.m., the climbers prepared for the climb. It was decided by Rob and Scott that weather conditions were good for making a summit attempt. They left Camp 4 around 11:30 p.m. The plan was to have some Sherpas go ahead and anchor the climbing ropes. It's not exactly clear why this didn't happen. One of the lead Sherpas was sickly, and also there was a miscommunication. Ultimately, not having the ropes rigged ahead of time played a role in the deadly consequences that occurred. Once the climbers got into the death zone, the going was slow, and everyone except for one of the guides from Mountain Madness, Anatoly Burkreev, were using supplemental oxygen tanks. When the climbers reached the balcony at 27,400 feet, a small area where they could rest, they ended up waiting for about an hour. Burning precious daylight while the ropes were fixed, adventure consultant client Beck Weathers was having trouble with his vision. He decided not to press on to the summit and would wait at the balcony to ascend with Rob Hall. A few more times, there were bottlenecks as the climbers waited for the ropes to be fixed. Mountain Madness guide Neil Beitelman stepped up and took over the job of rigging for the Sherpas. Around midday, some of the climbers made it to the south summit, Mount Everest's second highest point. The climbers noticed that the wind was picking up. 3 clients of Adventure Consultants, Lou Kosiski, John Taskey, and Stuart Hutchinson, decided to turn around and return to Camp 4. They didn't think they could reach the summit by the turnaround time of 1 p.m. Actually, there was some confusion as to whether the turnaround time was 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. When mountain climbing, a turnaround time is chosen before your climb begins. Basically, the turnaround time means the absolute last moment on your planned schedule that you will turn back. Climbers can become afflicted with summit fever. Summit fever is the obsessive desire and stubborn determination to reach the peak of a mountain at all costs, ignoring logical decisions. Summit fever plus sunk cost fallacy plus mental impairment due to altitude sickness can be a recipe for death on Mount Everest. Just after 1 p.m., guide Anatoly Burkreev arrived on the summit. Not far behind were guide Neil Beitelman and 4 clients: John Krakauer, Martin Adams, Andy Harris, and Cleve Schoening. Also, there was a big traffic jam of climbers on the Hillary Step just below the summit. Without supplemental oxygen, Anatoly couldn't stay on the summit long and quickly began to descend toward Camp 4 alone. Over the next hour, some of the other climbers reached the summit and then they began to descend. By 3 p.m., all of the Mountain Madness clients had been to the summit and were on their way down. The descending climbers realized that the wind was whipping up. It began to snow. Bad weather was creeping up the mountain. Scott Fisher finally summited shortly after 3:30 p.m. He had been ill and erratic on the climb, possibly suffering from high-altitude pulmonary edema, HAPE for short, or high-altitude cerebral edema, HACE, or a combination of both conditions. Though Sherpas told him to turn around, client Doug Hansen ignored them and continued to ascend. Rob Hall helped him. Close to 4 p.m., they finally reached the summit. Around 4:30, Rob radioed base camp saying that they were low on oxygen and needed help. Meanwhile, down below, guides Neil Beitelman and Matt Groom shepherded a large group of climbers in increasingly worsening weather. Beck Weathers, who had temporary blindness, joined the group as they passed the balcony. By 6 p.m., the storm had become a blizzard with fierce 80-mile-per-hour winds. 17 climbers were caught on the mountain after dark with a wind chill of 70 below zero. Most had run out of, or are soon to run out of, supplemental oxygen. The climbers couldn't see where they were going. There was thunder, lightning, and whiteout conditions so bad that the group came within 200 vertical feet of Camp 4. They had to stop and huddle together to wait out the storm. Finally, at midnight, the weather briefly eased, which allowed the guides to catch sight of Camp 4. The group continued on, but 4 climbers were too incapacitated to move: Beck Weathers, Yasuko Namba, Sandy Pittman, and Charlotte Fox. The others made it back to Camp 4 exhausted and on the verge of collapse. They pleaded that help be sent for the others. Guide Anatoly Bukriv ventured out into the storm and helped Charlotte and Sandy back to Camp 4. Unfortunately, he couldn't assist the nearly comatose Beck and Yasuko, especially in the middle of a storm. They were deemed beyond help and were left to perish. Still stranded near the summit, on the Hillary Step, were Rob Hall and Doug Hansen. Base Camp informed them that rescue was not possible. They suggested to Rob to leave Doug behind, saying that there was a chance he could make it on his own. He refused. During their unsuccessful attempt to descend, Rob briefly looked away, and when he looked back, Doug was gone, most likely fallen over the edge. Rob maintained radio contact with Base Camp throughout the night. He got a chance to say goodbye to his pregnant wife, who was patched through from New Zealand by satellite phone. Adventure Consultants guide Andy Harris, who was caught in the storm at the South Summit, also died. His body was never found. On the morning of May 11th, Scott Fisher and the leader of the Taiwanese team, Makalu Gao, were found together by Sherpas at 1,200 feet above Camp 4. Scott was unresponsive. Convinced that Scott was beyond hope, the Sherpas left him there. Although severely frostbitten, with assistance, Makalu was able to walk and was guided down by the Sherpas. Beck, who was left for dead, somehow survived the night. His companion, Yasuko, didn't. After being unconscious for hours, he was miraculously revived with a shot of dextromethasone, a potent steroid hormone with qualities that suppress immune activity and inflammation. Late on the afternoon of May 11th, Beck staggered into Camp 4 with severe frostbite. Makalu and Beck were assisted down to Camp 2 and were flown out in a very dangerous helicopter rescue at 19,860 feet. They both survived with amputations due to frostbite. In all, 8 climbers died during the storm. 3 Indian climbers on the Tibetan side of the mountain, Suang Smanla, Suang Paljor, and Dorje Mora. The leaders of the 2 Western expeditions, Rob Hall and Scott Fisher, guide Andy Harris, and 2 clients, Doug Hansen and Yasuko Namba, also perished. People around the world reacted to the tragedy. Much was made about the commercialization of Mount Everest and how inexperienced climbers rely on guides and oxygen tanks to fulfill their dreams when they have no business climbing Everest. Anatoly Bukriv was also criticized for not carrying oxygen and leaving clients behind to climb by himself. However, if he had not left when he did, he would not have been physically rested enough to assist with the rescue of Charlotte and Sandy. Also, the leaders of the climb, Scott and Rob, bore responsibility for ignoring the turnaround time. While it's impossible to know their motives, it's thought their competitive need to outdo each other's businesses encouraged them to make risky decisions. Since the 1996 disaster, several multi-person fatalities have occurred on Mount Everest. In 2014, 16 climbers scaling the Khumbu Icefall were killed when a huge wedge of ice the size of a mansion broke loose from the side of the mountain and smashed down against the slope below. Then in April 2015, a 7.8 magnitude earthquake in Nepal triggered an avalanche which wiped out South Base Camp, claiming 19 lives and leading to the cancellation of the climbing season. Most recently, in May of 2019, 11 climbers died during a bottleneck in the death zone. As long as mountains exist, humans strive to climb them. Would you climb Mount Everest? Why or why not? Let us know in the comments. Also, be sure to check out our other video, What Happens at and What Do We Know About Area 51? Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.